So the thoughts are being generated from your brain, which can be changed through your physiology, right? Changes to your body. So you have to realize, especially with first responders, let's just go a little deeper into the weeds here, that you have been trained at all times, most of the time, to suppress all emotions, right? That's how you got to do your job. So you're suppressing them. Now that's going to change the structures of the brain. So changing the connection between your brain and your body is going to change your thoughts.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you a person who I've grown very fond of in the last few months, a person who I discovered on LinkedIn, speaking to fellow first responders, a person who has treated and walked the path that we're going to be speaking about. Her name is Dr. Pamela Seraphine. She is a neuroscientist. She is a world-class author, international author, best-selling author. Her book is Neural Mastery, Power to Unlock the Brain's Potential. She is a percussionist, but she's also a trauma specialist. Welcome, doctor. How are you?
Thank you so much, Robert. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
I recently saw a post that you provided or submitted to LinkedIn, and that was a question you posed. Why is it well-intended leaders find themselves succumbing to unfavorable acts, becoming less than exceptional leadership, or let's put exceptional leaders?
Yeah, so I specialize in the neuroscience of high stakes leadership. And so that article, I wrote that because, man, we have so much to cover here. Because what I was speaking about is, why do well-meaning leaders eventually lean towards, unintentionally, towards compromise? And the popular narrative, of course, is flawed character, right? We kind of attack the character. And reality is, it is the betrayal of neurobiology. Now, that can be a little confusing for people because we like to blame, but when you understand how the brain works with the body and what happens to the brain under chronic threat and pressure, it changes the wiring and the biochemistry of the brain and body, the bidirectional feedback loop, and that changes the personality, the beliefs, that identity of that person. And so it's complicated because, like I said, even the most well-meaning human beings, good people, I see them all the time, good people, high integrity, will start to slip because their brain has been wired to reward them for the compromise. And I know that's really hard to believe, but it's 100% true. And we have to get out of this, this idea. And I think it's because people want other people to pay for it, right? So I'm all for the consequences of corruption or compromise. We're not talking about not having a consequence. However, if you're going to talk about problem solving, especially strategic problem solving, you have to be dealing with reality. So the reality that is that it changes the function, the structure, the neurochemistry, the biochemistry. It changes everything. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how high up the food chain you are. It's going to change you, and you will not be aware of it, because that's what the brain does. It will do everything it can to protect you from knowing that you're compromised.
Let's digest what you just said, please. So, in the context of leadership or leading a productive life, we are impacted by our experiences, right? That then create feelings and emotions, right? Two separate factors here, or experiences. So, what you're saying is that in order to be successful, live productive life, we have to know how to understand what's happening inside of us, right? Our brains are reacting to our experiences, and therefore our brains are causing us, I guess, sabotaging at times.
Yeah,
So
100%.
have to fight the brain's inner self, I guess, words in your mind, right? The little voice in your head that's telling you you're not worthy, or you can't accomplish this, or doubt, creating doubt. Is that what you're speaking of?
That kind of opens the door because keep in mind, traditional leadership and performance models themselves were not designed for this level of complexity that we're dealing with, this constant threat and pressure that leaders are dealing with. They weren't designed for that. They were designed before we even knew how the brain actually works under constant threat. So the models they're using is driving performance breakdown and the integrity of their leadership without them realizing it. So it's not just about the voice in their head, because most leaders don't even know what that voice is, right? They don't realize it is the brain and that you are not your brain. Now, the paradigm has been, or the ideology is that you are your mind. And so everything is based on the mind. Well, that's such flawed logic. It doesn't work like that. So there's a deeper discussion of the fact that you're not your mind and you're not your brain, right? So you're going to have to discern that. Otherwise, that voice in your head is really your brain arguing with your brain, right? So leaders or any high performer in that, and I'm speaking specifically to them because they have already mastered so many of the other skills. So we're not talking about mental toughness. We're not talking about resilience because they've already usually mastered those skills. We're talking about them not having other skills and being able to discern and being able to control their brain and the awareness of what has happened in their nervous system.
So that lack of awareness, does that account for the anxiety that we feel and we give into at times?
Well, that's a great question because I hear a lot about anxiety. Now, the popular narrative is that you're aware, you think you're aware, that it's the thoughts. So therefore change your thoughts. But the reality is most, especially in first responder military culture, reality is it's coming through your body. So it's sensory input before the thoughts. It's not the thoughts. It's sensory input, which is not the same thing. So you could be aware that it's your thoughts, but it's not. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's embedded in your nervous system and the way your brain is processing that information. That's the problem. So lack of awareness of that is the problem.
Well, let's talk about the solution. How do we become aware?
Well, conversations like these are so important because it's easy to believe that, like I said, we're blaming leaders or you're somebody that wants to be a leader. They're trying their best. We're blaming them. But if you don't have the awareness that this can happen to you, how do you know you haven't drift into compromise, right? So the conversation like this is just so important because it's so paradigm shifting. Like this is all my work is very paradigm shifting. So I always got to wean everybody in because it's like what you thought is reality, what you thought was awareness or self-mastery isn't. You haven't even opened the gate yet.
So since you're an educator, say you have a class in front of you right now of leaders who are all striving to be that exceptional leader, the one that's accomplished, the one that meets all the requirements that's put before them and born. What is your advice? How to go about becoming an exceptional leader?
Well, first of all, you have to have becoming an exceptional leader part of your identity, what you believe about yourself. And what I see mostly is that people don't even claim the identity. They don't even want the responsibility of being an exceptional leader. So you've got to claim that first because that's the goal. You're giving your brain that directive. I'm going to be, or I am an exceptional leader. And then the process of having those skills, you have to embody them. You can't pretend to be an exceptional leader. And right. And so we have this whole side of leadership where we're talking about leading other people, but really yet barely have begun leading yourself. And let me say this, I don't teach anything I haven't mastered. So it took me a long time to master this, but this is the difference between mastery and pretending that you have these skills in place. So in order to become that, you have to gain the skills. So the problem, let me add to this with peer support, because peer support is so incredibly important in your culture. But if they don't have the training in place and this kind of really elite training and education, it's a broken method. They can't help because they haven't embodied it. There's no awareness. So that doesn't mean they're not doing good in the world, and I'm not dismissing older models because my work is meant to elevate and expand them, but we can't pretend that they're working because they're not. So the education and training and this new paradigm of that, it isn't what you think it was. It's not your mind. This has nothing to do with your mind or being a weakness or a character. This is much deeper. And I want to add to that, we have to stop having intellectual laziness. Not with you guys. You guys are the most important, right? You need the highest level of skills possible. And to me, that's the reward for your service. That's how it should be.
As you're speaking, I'm trying to not make it about me, but I'm reflecting on my own personal experiences, right? So I can internalize it.
Of course.
And I suspect the audience will be doing the same thing. So because it's how does this apply to me? Question. Let's use me as an example. So I was in the military during peacetime. We experienced a lot of, I guess, participation conflicts around the world. So I saw that. Then I go into police work and spent the next 26 years in law enforcement. Thank God it wasn't all bad because there were some great parts of being a police officer, bad experiences. But during the course of my 26 years, I did see my share of critical incidents, right? The worst humanity has to offer. I saw a lot of conflict. I saw some of my friends, my own personal friends in police work, my partners, either take their lives or do things that were very, very destructive to themselves, right? And they tank their careers, tank their relationships, and we're all dealing with that. And then later on, I find myself in a supervisory position and a leadership role, rising through the ranks and having to deal with all those individual personalities, my own experiences. How does a leader, I guess, compartmentalize their experiences for the purpose of becoming better servant? Does that make sense? And can you kind of walk us through what your advice or for our audience to kind of get the conversation rolling?
Sure. Well, first of all, the idea of compartmentalizing is flawed because you have one brain. So even if your professional side, everything was flourishing, but you've got problems in your personal life, it's still one brain. So everything you do is affecting you, right? It's who you have become. And this is what I'm saying. You might not have known that those experiences had changed your personality, your identity, but it did. It can't not, right? So the way you are now offering this service of your podcast and educating, that shows that something didn't add up, right? So all the people that I work with, they, like I said, they are mentally tough. They've done everything right, but something has gone sideways. They don't know what it is. And that's the conversation that has to be brought to the forefront. We just can't bring these old ways of being forward into the future, right? So every time we have a conversation, you and you're going to discover something, hopefully, about yourself that you thought, well, wait a minute. Well, that means that didn't make sense back then. That wasn't that person's fault that took their life. That was their brain, 100%. We're still on the old model where we think the person just decided it, like it's them. And it's so flawed. It isn't as all that.
So the statement that they just can't help themselves, that's not applicable?
Well, now we're going to get into the weeds here. So let's talk about the difference between the brain and the soul, because I write a lot about this in my book, and very few scientists actually do that. So I think of the brain as being the processor of all your experiences. Your body is the regulator of those experiences. Your mind is the interpreter, just the interpreter, thoughts, emotions. But your soul is your essence of self, the commander of self. So that's four entities of the self. Okay, so that's a new model right there, four entities of self. The soul of you is the essence. Now, you don't have to call it soul. You can call it your authentic self, your godlike self, your spirit, doesn't matter. But it's a separate essence of self. So when we're talking about suicide or any kind of compromise, it doesn't even matter. There is a chance that your brain is running the show. If you're unaware how to strengthen the essence of self, your soul, your brain will hijack everything and it can completely destroy your life. And it absolutely can tell you to end your life because you think that voice is you, unless you understand that it's not. It's impossible to be you. It doesn't even make sense that that's, because we can see it, right? We can see how the brain's working. So the essence of self is so different. So it is that is the commander. And that's what you have to learn. You have to learn to use your mind to change your brain, to use your body to change your brain. But you don't let the brain be in charge because it will betray you at epic levels. And you won't even know.
So how do we go about just that, not letting our brain, our experiences, our fears, everything that's not us influence our actions?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, right? I tried to simplify it as much as I could in my book to open that door to like, okay, if you're not your brain, what's running the show? And how do we strengthen? And like I said, if you don't want to call it soul, don't call it soul. I know what it's like. Let me add this. I know it's like to have my soul feel like it's dying. I came very close to ending my own life. I know what it's like to be completely compromised. And I'm a good person, but I was very much a victim. I don't have the victim mentality, but you can be a victim. like we're not like erasing that. So you have to have that awareness, that separation. That's the first step. That maybe the voice in my head is my brain. So that means where's the soul? And you usually can start to, I have a lot of protocols how to start to tune into that. But there's an energy linked to it, right? There's something you're drawn to. There's something that feeds your soul. A lot of times it doesn't make any sense to other people, right? It's very personal. And you have to strengthen that awareness to be able to separate the difference between your brain and your soul and that voice in your head. Because it can't be the mind. Because the mind is like I said, that is going to be thoughts. You can't be your thoughts. Like that you're doomed if you're your thoughts and the images. So that separation and that awareness, what I call conscious awareness, is absolutely step number one. You got to get there first.
So can you break down a little bit about your thoughts, right? I'm trying to help others understand. And I get the fact, listen, if you're really intrigued, as I was, buy the book, Neuro Mastery by Dr. Pamela Seraphine. On Amazon, you can find it on other online distributors, publishers.
Yes.
So can you help us understand about thoughts as you're in the context of what you're speaking or how you're describing them?
Yeah. Yeah. So the thoughts are being generated from your brain, which can be changed through your physiology, right? Changes to your body. So you have to realize, especially with first responders, let's just go a little deeper into the weeds here, that you have been trained at all times, most of the time, to suppress all emotions, right? That's how you got to do your job. So you're suppressing them. Now that's going to change the structures of the brain. So changing the connection between your brain and your body is going to change your thoughts. And what's happening is most of the time, thoughts being you're not even experiencing them. So let's look at the difference between feelings and emotions, right? Emotions being the physiological changes. Your feelings are the interpretation of those changes. So that's a huge difference. So a lot of the time, especially with first responders, they're basically, when the time you come to see me, they're basically numb. They're not thinking anything like that, or they're not experiencing it through their body because they've disconnected. So this is why I'm saying you can't think that your thoughts are you. Like that, that's so flawed, right? Because it can change depending on just your physiology alone or sensory input.
Now, for those of you that are watching this and are immediately drawing skepticism, I would caution you to go down that path. Just say, halt right there. Open your mind to what the doctor's saying. Possibility that maybe you've been looking at your life, your actions, the actions of others in the wrong context.
Yeah.
Doctor, please, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it is so true. Like once you change the model, which is what I have done, a different model, a different language, you see yourself differently and you will see everybody else differently. Your interactions, your worldview changes because you're not looking at it as such a limited, like you are your mind, you are responsible for your own, actions, yada, yada. It's like everything you do can change the function and the structure and the connections of your brain. Now that leaves tremendous possibility. And I spoke to you about this before, is you haven't even stepped into what's possible for you because you're still using the old model. So once you have command of your brain and your body, knowing the difference, it's a whole new world. Like it's so different because the other one is just so limiting. You're going to be listening to what you think is logic. And here it's just so flawed. It's just absolutely flawed.
So, can you give us a couple pointers on how we can go about letting go of the full practices that we're so creatures of habit? And
Yeah.
we do forever. Gotta be right. We've been doing it.
Yeah, right. That's the argument. It's been like this for centuries, right? We've thought we were the mind the whole time, and like, how could it be so wrong? Really, I look at it as still so many believing in the flat Earth philosophy, right? They really thought the Earth was flat, but if you see it through it, then you know it was never flat. Right. So this change is small, and all you have to do is open the door. Like, I'm like, you don't have to believe me. It doesn't make any difference to me, but open the door for you and start to see, does it make sense? Like, use that kind of logic. Does this make sense that you can have the toughest men in the world? We're talking military, the toughest, mentally toughest. They're so resilient. They've done everything right and still they collapse. And it seems like, oh, it's a weakness. No, it's impossible. It's physical. It's a physical problem. So once you open that door and you go, wait a minute, what if this voice in my head isn't me? What if there's more to me than that voice? And then you open it, and the reward was going to be there. Like, I'm just like showing you what's possible, and then of course the training, but I'm like opening the door and it's like, no, you decide. You decide. You already know. I know people that are drawn to me. They already know something's wrong. They already know it doesn't add up. So maybe there's a way.
So recently, and I shared this with you, in preparation for a documentary that we're filming, and we're in editing phase of the production. It's called Out of the Fire, Into the Light. And it's the path of war veterans, combat veterans, not just from their experiences in war, but it's post the war. Their experience 20 years of struggling with the impact of war. Had a privilege of interviewing both the members of that platoon that will be featured in this documentary, but also military leaders and SEAL team members who were involved in even greater amounts of combat, deadlier amounts of combat, if you will, hairier experiences. And the one thing that has been shared, although maybe verbalized in different ways, is that they went from feeling the camaraderie, the feeling of, man, I'm doing something. I'm in the throes of whatever life is thrown at me. But then going to this ultimate feeling, they all share in different ways, but they all come to, I'm a nobody. I went from
Mhm.
combat, hiked the military service to my own personal life, and then stalled.
That's the reality, right? You have them, they've come from this, they've gone to this, now they're suffering. But what they don't realize is their identity can be changed at any time. They're not limited. The old model is so limited. Like I can only be this, but I can't be so many other things. And that's what I'm saying. They haven't even opened the door to it yet. And that's what they have to look forward to, because they had that limited model. If you could only be this, your identity's wired in that you'd only be able to have one, how you perceive the world, how you perceive what's possible for yourself has been limited by the old model. Well, now you change it and there's no limit, right? They have to learn how to create a new future identity that is in alignment with who they want to become and what they want to do, in alignment with their values, which their values have probably changed. And that's the other part of what I was saying with their soul, which is why I see so many, because their soul's dying. They don't know what they want. Their soul is just kind of dying. You got to refeed that, rebuild that soul. And then that's the energy and power that creates the new, the hope. Like they haven't tapped into it yet. And that's why I'm like so passionate about getting in front of it. It's like, you haven't even started. That's a speck compared to what's possible for you. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And let me use myself as an example, because I spent 30 years in the music industry. Like I'm a world percussionist. That was my domain. What would have happened if I had just stayed there? Like that, like what? There's this entire other huge side of my identity now that has been earned. You can't take it away. And I could have just stayed, which would have been fine. But I'm limitless because I don't go by that standard. My standard is excellent. It is mastery, right? And that's why I draw in the same kind of people, because I guarantee you those vets, they value mastery, they value excellence. You got to tie into that for their future.
100%. And as it relates to first responders, man, you just hit it on
Yeah,
the head. Many of them can't, after 30 years, 40 years of law enforcement, even some of close to 50 years of law enforcement,
yeah,
they just can't let it go. And then when they
yeah.
do, there's a high rate of suicide. Or
They can't let it go because they don't know how to, not because they don't want to. They have not had access to a new model. So with the old model, they're like, I don't want to go on. There isn't anything more, right? I've done it all. And their brain has completely hijacked them. And then, of course, there is no hope, right? So it's very understandable. I'm like, oh, I totally get that. Like I have lived that, until you use a different lens. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. There's a whole new life that is incredible what you can do. You haven't even met the people yet that are going to change your life. And that's reality.
you bring up some great points. I tell you, this is such a rich conversation that I wish we could go on for hours discussing. Doctor, for the benefit of our audience, the last few minutes here, tell us how they can get a hold of you, where they can learn more about you, what you're doing, maybe learn more about this new paradigm shift that you're laying before our eyes and ears right now.
Sure. Well, I can be reached on my website, drpamelaseraphine.com. Now, what I've done now is created a signature keynote called High Performance Without Compromise. And so that's what I'm booking for 2026. That's the paradigm shifting. Like I am bringing it to the people, because that's the starting point before you can do the training. So I offer that. And I also offer, of course, high performance coaching with the new model. And yes, sometimes I bring in, if needed, the trauma recovery. That's a piece. That's not the heart of it, right? The goal is to achieve the goals that matter to you. So that's always the goal with any of these models, is what matters to you, and it's very results driven. So I want to just highlight that, because that's what it's about, each individual.
Doctor, we've come to the last minutes here of our time that we have available to us. For those of you watching, we've been speaking with Dr. Pamela Seraphine, a neuroscientist, trauma specialist, a world-class international author, and a percussionist. Phenomenal combination.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Millers, Michael Grant Miller, Community News Team. Thank you to our producer behind the scenes, Alex Sukas, always there. We can't do this show without you. Thank you so much. To you, the audience, we look forward to seeing you, and we thank you for tuning in.